Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Dominions 5, Warriors of the Faith, the Return of Ursula. I am Marcus Aurelius, and in this episode, we're going to talk about Ursula, praise her. We're going to talk about our nation, Middle Age Uruk, and we are going to talk about the strategies that I hope to use in the upcoming game. Now, I always do this with all my series of Dominions. Always the second episode is an explanation of the choices that we made and how the game's going to start. But there was one person who, in a previous series, wrote something along the lines of, will this guy ever shut up and play the game? So, if you are this person, or you have similar feelings to this person, or you're just interested in the story or the role-playing and aren't too interested in the details, then you might want to skip this episode and watch the next one, episode 3, which is when we're going to start the actual gameplay. However, if you want to get involved in the nitty-gritty, if you want to see what I have designed Ursula to do, how we're going to hopefully play this nation, and what my ideas are in terms of maximizing their effectiveness, then you're definitely going to be interested in this episode. And of course, as always, I have to admit that I am not, despite hundreds of hours playing Dominions, an expert player. And there are tons of people out there who are better than I am and can provide a lot of support and information in the comments, and I always appreciate that. Despite not being an expert player, I have put about 60 hours into this game so far, and every second of it, well, the seconds that aren't being used in the random map editor, have been put into Uruk. So I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of them and their strengths and what I want to do with them. So hopefully those of you who are interested can learn a little bit from this episode, and of course those of you who know more than I do can help me down in the comments. So first off, let's talk about Ursula. And to do that, I'm just going to create a new game. It's just going to be random. Let's use one of the smallest maps. Okay. Test is fine. Alright. Uruk, and I don't care about the rest because we're not actually going to be playing a game. We're just loading it up so that we can see our units. Alright, so this is Uruk, the city-states, the Middle Age version of Ur, and you could pause the screen and read the description if you'd like. It's got a lot of good flavor about how the nation is run, and I utilize a lot of that in my skits, like the introduction you just saw. Regarding the nation as a whole, they have some national features. They prefer the heat scale +1. So for those of you who don't know, Dominions, you could have as much as 3 cold or 3 hot. And in the middle, of course, is just temperate weather. And so these guys prefer it one step toward hot. For their military, they have Enkidu infantry and fearsome Mushushu chariots. That's this down here. In the early age of Ur, they had the Mushushu, or the dragons. I forget what they're called. I think it starts with an S. But the dragons were just by themselves. And they were sacred, which was the Sarush. They were called Sarushes, yes. And in this version of the country, in Uruk, they are not sacred anymore, and they now have chariots behind them. And there's some unique facets about them, but they are capital only, slow to recruit, and relatively expensive. So, at least in the early game, we're not going to be seeing very much of them. Now, Uruk is very diverse magically. They have access to astral, nature, earth, water, and air, and that's pretty much the order in which they have their strength. They can get pretty high in astral, I think up to 4 astral, reliably. They can have a 5, I think, if you're lucky with some randoms, but you're never lucky with the randoms. So nature's their next strength, and then earth, water, and air they're actually fairly weak at, and in order to really do anything with those paths, we're going to need some buffing. But that is what Ursula, praise her, is for. Now, one of the great things about Uruk, and Ur as well, is that they have amazing priests. And by amazing, what I mean is they're level 3 holy, which is super important in this game because it allows 2 things. One, it allows you to claim thrones. Any one of our level 3 priests, of which we will have several, can claim a throne. Whereas with other nations, you can only do it with your god or your prophet. So it allows a lot of flexibility. The next good thing about level 3 Holy is that you can do what's called Divine Blessing, which means the entire battlefield is blessed, so any sacred troops or commanders you have on the battlefield are blessed all at once, instead of having to have several priests blessing all over the place, which is super convenient for me because I don't like the micromanagement. Makes it a lot easier for me. Now, another thing is they have a unit that is a eulogist, which means they are really good at recalling a dead god. We are hopefully never going to use those units. I have absolutely no intention for Ursula, praise her, to die. She is an administrator, and that's the role I've chosen for her in this campaign. She is not going to be on the front lines of battle fighting. She is going to be supporting our national mages by forging items that improve their ability to do their job, and also to cast some high-level spells that they aren't able to that will benefit our nation as a whole. She's also a fantastic site searcher, so we'll be using her a little bit for that as well. They have really awesome cities. They have a fortified city, which is their highest level building, and it gives you 40 admin points, or 50 admin points. And what that means essentially is that is the amount of, the percentage of resources that it pulls from neighboring provinces. So the higher that number is, essentially, the better. I think it also improves your income by that amount or something along those lines, that percentage. So you definitely want a high administration level, and some of the other nations, the highest they can get is like a castle, which is only 40. I could totally be wrong on this because, again, I've only played Uruk, but when I've conquered other nations' castles, the highest I've seen them go is 40. And they have really expensive temples. Most nations can buy a temple for 400 gold. Uruk, unfortunately, has to pay 600, which kind of sucks, and it's why income is a huge deal and why we want to focus on it. So we're going to skip the units right now for a second, and we're going to go straight to our god. Our goddess, actually. We're going to load up Ursula. Praise her. No, why did that do that? Okay, let's try this one more time. Ursula. Alright, so it's not letting me actually look at her. That kind of sucks. View created pretenders. There we go. Alright. Here is Ursula, the Anunnaki of love and war. That is not a term that I came up with. That is what the game refers to this pretender chassis as. If you're interested, Ursula is probably based on the Sumerian goddess Inanna, who is also known to the Babylonians and Assyrians as Ishtar. And so you can look that up and learn all about what the basis for this particular type of goddess came from. But so here's what I'm doing with her. I'm giving her 4 air, 4 earth, and 7 nature. Now the reason for this is because of the bless that you get from that. Well, 4 air and 4 earth is because it allows her to forge items and cast spells that my national mages cannot, and also forge boosters to improve the quality of my national mages. But the nature, particularly the 7 nature, is for the blessing, which gives our sacred commanders and troops. Now bear in mind, almost every single one of our commanders is sacred, the regeneration ability. And regeneration means that every turn of battle, they will regenerate 10% of lost hit points. Now that works well with Enkidu, particularly because humans typically only have about 10 hit points, and Enkidu have more than that. So it's actually, they have more hit points to regen. But also, I have 2 times reinvigoration, which essentially means that every turn, all of our sacred units and mages will reinvigorate 2 of their encumbrance points, which is really important, not only for our troops, because as troops are attacked and as they fight and walk around in their armor, they get encumbrance, which means they fight less effectively and they're more easy to hit. This kind of combats that, but also mages. Mages tend to wear themselves out casting spells, and they go unconscious. This will slow that down a bit. And also, mostly for our commanders who are mages, and not so much for our troops, is a 3-time precision bonus. Precision is an interesting statistic because it starts at 10 normally, and I don't know the details. It's been a long time since I've read the manual, but I think everything above 10 counts double, I want to say. So 13 precision is actually like 6 something better than 10. It's not important, but essentially we're just really good with our spells. We're really good at hitting things. We are not going to miss as much. Now, if only we had sacred archers, that would be really effective. And I also, instead of going for precision, I took some minor shock resistance. And the reason I did that is because a lot of our mages will have one path in Earth, which means they'll be able to buff themselves by casting a spell called Stone Skin. I'm sorry, Iron Skin, which is the higher level of Stone Skin. And it is weak to shock. So just in case the AI gets smart and uses shock, I thought minor shock resistance on all my mages who are iron skinning themselves would be kind of a good idea. Very situational, but 1 precision, I don't know. You could make the argument that taking 4 precision would have been a better choice. But I'm not much of a min-maxer. And so that's pretty much Ursula. Just her normal stuff here. She has Awe, which isn't going to avail her too much because, again, I don't want her to be in battle. But Awe essentially means that when any time somebody tries to hit her, they have to roll against their morale to see if they will strike her or if they'll just be too overawed by her beauty and magnificence and ferocity. She is, shock resistant, that's because of the bless. Poison resistant, I guess that's natural, because I don't see anything that causes it. She does fly, of course, those wings aren't just for show. She has a supply bonus of 70 due to her large amount of nature magic. And she has this unique ability that I've never seen before, and I'm not exactly sure how it works, but it's called Combat Caster. And she's especially good at casting spells in melee. Okay, well, this is what it does. It gives her a 50% chance of trying to cast a spell in melee, I guess when she's on her autopilot, and the chance of her being interrupted in her spellcasting by taking a hit is halved. However, we're not going to worry about that, because if Ursula is in combat, we are doing something wrong. I could possibly see her at the end leading armies so she can cast some of the really high-level endgame battle spells, but I'm not really going to have her up there mixing it up. Just in case, also to protect her, she does come with 2 lionesses, which are unique in the fact that when they die, they scream like a human woman, which is kind of off-putting. The first couple times you hear it, you're like, "Who died? Who died?" Oh, it was the lioness. Anyway, she has a taloned kick. Of course, her bare fist, which actually hits like a ton of bricks with 18 damage. And the only thing she wears for protection initially is a crown. A tiara, as we all know. Okay, I also set her at 5 Dominion. I wanted it to be higher, but well, you got to make choices. Like, if I could have cheated and given her, let's say, a couple points of blood for the Blood Fecundity spell, which is basically like the Ursula spell, I would have done that, and I would have also given her better scales. But again, that you have to stick within point totals that are preset. So 5 Dominion's all she gets. She does get 1 order because we need money as much as possible, and that's all I could afford. She gets 2 production because we need production more than we need money. All of our troops cost a lot. They all wear a ton of armor. Our leaders, for the most part, are pretty cheap in terms of resources, but our troops, all of them, are very, very expensive. So, remember I said at the beginning that we like it when it's hot. We like heat 1. So I actually took this down a notch and set it to heat 0. This gives us some extra points, but it also helps us strategically because when it's cold, mountains can't be crossed, or at least passable mountains can't be crossed. And when it's hot, rivers can't be crossed. So depending on what season it is, we'll have different strategic options available to us on the map. Growth 1, because growth equals income, and income is very important, but also it's an Ursula kind of thing, right? She's a goddess of fertility, so it wouldn't make much sense if her dominion didn't have growth in it. And then to pay for all this, I have Misfortune 1, which really sucks. Especially when your empire gets bigger, you'll notice that we're getting tons of negative events, and not a lot of them are super debilitating, but they're just annoying. And another difficult thing is Drain 1. The way we're going to defeat this is by forging owl quills, which our level 1 air mages can do, and just by working hard to hire a lot of research mages. This is going to set us back with the AI. The AI is going to get an early jump on research ahead of us, because what this means essentially is that every mage we recruit has 1 less research point than they should. So if they're supposed to have 6, they only have 5, and so on and so forth. And we're already not a fantastic research nation, so this is definitely going to set us back, but hopefully we're going to be able to surpass it. And that is our current dominion. And she is dormant. Essentially, she's going to be traveling the world of Uruk for a year to round up all of the different NCs, the priest kings of the different cities, and get them on her side. And that is my in-character explanation for why she's going to be away from the picture for a year. Unlike previous Dominions games, being dormant or imprisoned even have a very severe setback, which is in Dominions 4 and previous, a lot of people would set an imprisoned god with amazing magic so they can get an amazing bless. But in this game, Dominions 5, a lot of the really awesome bless effects, such as regeneration here, are what's called incarnate only, which means that you can only have them when your god is walking around. So for a year, our sacred troops are not going to get this regeneration ability. So we're going to play around that. We're not going to really do much with sacred troops until Ursula, praise her, has arrived. So that is Ursula. Now we're going to go back to our little Enkidu. Well, big Enkidu, actually. Bigger than human, anyway. Okay. So what we start out with is the basic scout and commander that pretty much every nation gets. The commander can hold, I believe, 40 troops. Other than that, he's just pretty unremarkable. Then we have an array of mages, and there's different niche uses for all of them. First, we have the Naditu. Now, the Naditu, you're not going to see me recruiting a lot of at the beginning, but maybe you'll see me recruiting more later on. And here's why. From the cost perspective, they are our best researcher. They get 7 research points for the cost of 70 gold, which is 10 gold per research point, which is better than any other person. However, they are guaranteed to have 1 astral, which makes them less desirable, and I'll tell you why in a bit. But what they seem to be really good at, what they seem to be designed for, is to be communion slaves. And for those who don't know, what that means is there's a spell called Communion, which allows weaker mages to utilize their power to buff a stronger mage on the battlefield. So they just kind of sit there and channel their power to that other mage. And the way to do that is through an astral spell. So what these ladies can do, if you get 2 of them, for example, they could buff another mage up 1 level in all paths that they have. And if you get 4 of them, they'll bump that mage up to 2 levels higher. Very powerful. I'm not going to use it much simply because there's a lot of micromanagement involved. And as I mentioned before, I don't like that. So I'm not going to be recruiting a lot of these guys. Maybe later in the game when we have some really amazing spells to play with, I might consider it. Maybe in 1 or 2 armies. I'm not going to go overboard with it. So you're not going to be seeing tons of communions in this campaign. But I believe that's what this unit pretty much is designed for. You're going to be seeing a lot of these ladies. They are called Nins. And what they are is essentially our research mage. Now, they're 5 gold more than the Naditus, but they're worth it because they have a chance of 1 of 4 paths. Now, having 1 in a path is not particularly great, so for the most part, they're going to start off as researchers, but later in the game, they really come into their own, and there's different strategies you can employ for them. For example, the 1 water Nins can cast a really awesome late-game spell called Frozen Heart. It only requires 1 water, and it takes forever to research up to it, but once we get there, we'll hopefully have tons of these ladies sitting around with nothing to do that we can then put in battle, and it's a great spell. The Earth ones, kind of useless. They're going to focus on researching. Although with a pair of Earth boots, they can Haruspex, or no, Gnome lore. Oh god, Marcus. So that's good for site searching. But I'm not going to necessarily be committing Earth boots to every single one of them so that they can go into battle. The Astral ones, like the Naditus, can be used as communion slaves. Or, I guess, if they're just not doing anything else, you can throw them on the battlefield and have them cast Body Ethereal 5 times, which will hopefully make a lot of our troops ethereal. The interesting ones are the nature ones, because, as I mentioned before, one of our effects of Ursula's Bless is an increase in precision. Well, there's also a nature spell called Eagle Eyes, which is relatively easy to get to, which also increases precision. So, these ladies, blessed, and with casting that spell, should have really awesome precision. They should be able to essentially hit anything. And so what we can do is we can employ them on the battlefield as kind of like assassins. We can give them really good bows, have them fire rear or fire large enemy monsters or something, and just have them take shots. all the battlefield with their supremely good precision. That's my idea for them. You could also do that with these ladies, the Galas, who come stock with one nature. They're the ones that are able to bring back gods easily. But I find them to be not as useful, and you won't see me recruiting hardly any of them. Because, one, I don't intend for Ursula to die, but two, they have Spell Singer, which means that spells are easier to cast, meaning I guess they generate less fatigue, but they take long. Twice as long, I think. So, if my goal is to quickly buff up one of these ladies to become an assassin and have her shoot really well, it's not going to do me too much good if she spends half the battlefield getting warmed up to cast her spells, whereas the Nins can do it in half as much time. So they're just better for that purpose. And notice, by the way, that all of these ladies so far are sacred, which means they can be blessed with Ursula's Bless, which gives them regeneration, enhanced precision, enhanced reinvigoration, and what's really cool about that, too, is they cost half as much to maintain as a regular unit. So you'll see here that this guy here, the Enkidu Commander, only costs 45 gold to recruit, but he costs, morale? He costs 36 gold a year to maintain. Whereas a Nin costs more gold than him at 75, but only 30 gold to maintain. Because again, she's sacred, and as a result costs less to maintain. And all of our guys are like that, which is fantastic. Now we get to the old school. These are the Ur guys from the last series, the Gudus. Gudus are very situational. They have a 50% chance of either air or earth. So they're the only ones that get... no, that's not true. They're not the only ones that get earth. But they're the only ones that reliably get earth. And so you'll see me recruiting a couple of these guys at the beginning just to have, for example, someone who's able to forge owl quills. So he needs 1 air. And then for 1 earth, again, if we just need someone to do some gnome loring and we don't have a Nin available or whatnot. Ashipus. I love the name. What makes these guys cool, and as a result I'm going to try to have one in every single fort that we have, is that they are disease healers. So should one of our commanders, or Ursula forbid, even Ursula herself get diseased, we're immediately going to get them in range of one of these guys' stat so that they can take care of that. Other than that, they're just general mages. I'll be using them for research, but again, in a pinch, disease healer. The Ishibs are interesting because they are the only recruitable land unit who can get 2 water. There's a 25% chance of that. So we're going to be recruiting a bunch of these guys and probably wasting most of them until we finally get one with 2 water. And once that happens, then we're in business because we can forge water boosters and we'll have some effective water magic. That's really their only purpose, though. Now, these are really important. The Eris Dingers, or Erish Dingers, because they have Fortune Teller. And as you recall from earlier in this episode, we have a Misfortune Dominion. So I want to have one of these ladies in every single castle as well researching, because they will hopefully prevent us from having really bad misfortune events. You'll see a little note, it'll pop up and say, there was going to be a terrible event happening to this province, but Sally, or whatever her name is, stopped it. They also, though, have 2 Astral, which is fun, and they're good at early for site searching. Because since Ursula doesn't have any Astral, one of these can run out and site search. I've said this in previous campaigns, but since you might not have seen them, just a quick kind of rundown. With site searching, and this is how it was in Dominions 4, I don't think it's changed, but if you have 2... let's start with 1. If you have 1 in a path, like 1 water, you're generally going to find about half as many of the available magic sites in a province as there are. If you have 2 in a path, you'll find about 75%. If you have 3 in a path, you'll find about 95%, or almost all of them. And finally, if you have 4 in a path, you will find everything. So these are really cost-effective site searchers. They will find about 75% of all astral sites. It won't get us the really, really good ones, so later on we might want to go back and cast a spell or something to find those. But for the early part of the game, just to build some gems, this is fine. Then, this is going to be our most common leader. It is our best leader in terms of being able to have as much troops. It leads 80, but also he is our only leader that can have up to 3 squads. Why that's important is because in previous Dominions, your troops started off in a box, and if you wanted them to go into a different formation, like say a line, it would lower their morale. In this game, what they do instead, it doesn't lower their morale, but only certain commanders, specifically those who can lead 3 squads, are able to do it. So every other commander in our nation can only lead troops in basically boxes, but this guy can lead them in lines, which makes him very important. Not only that, but he's a level 2 priest and can Sermon of Courage, which is important, and he's incredibly versatile because he comes with 1 water and 1 nature, but could theoretically get 1 water or 1 nature more, meaning 2 water and 2 nature. So I mentioned before, the Ishib is not the only 2 water, but these guys are going to be more busy than for site searching and stuff like that, or forging. What's really neat is they can get Astral or Earth. So if they get Earth, we can Iron Skin them. Again, that's the reason for the shock resistance. And if they get Astral, we can Body Ethereal. And out of the gate, they can Liquid Body. So they already have tons of buffing spells. In fact, the only one they don't get is Mist Form. So conceivably, with 28 hit points and regeneration, these guys could be thugs. I'm not good at thugs. I'm better at super combatants. With the point of a thug is to have them be effective and cheap. And I'm not very good at that. I like to put tons of items on everybody. That's just how I play, which is why I probably suck at multiplayer. But so maybe somebody in the comments could tell me effective and cheap ways of making these guys good thugs. Obviously, you'd want to self-cast some buffing spells, but I mean items that you think might really synergize well with them. One thing I have noticed is their traditional armor, the Bronze Hauberk, has an encumbrance of 2. Their encumbrance is high for a mage. So after a few spells, they're pooped out. So our Reinvigoration Bless will obviously help, but Reinvigoration items also work really well on these guys, but so does changing out their armor. Like there's a later, I think it's level 6, construction Earth armor, the Armor of Knights it's called, which essentially has like twice the protection of this one, but only 1 encumbrance. So it's a nice little upgrade. The air armor is good too if we find air gems, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Otherwise, yeah, so you're going to be seeing a lot of these guys. They're the Priest Kings of Uruk, and they're going to be leading the vast majority of our armies. But they're not going to be doing so alone. In every army, hopefully, they're going to be accompanied by an Entu. And the Entu is also a fortune teller, actually a better fortune teller than the Erestinger, but they're so expensive and they take 2 turns to recruit, so we're not going to be using them just to sit in towns and prevent bad events. We're going to send them out in the battlefield. They are inspiring, which is great and all, but of course their leadership doesn't have 3 squads, so they can't put people in lines. They're old age, which sucks, which means they can get diseases and afflictions, although our Dominion will hopefully reduce that a little bit. But they have 3 holy, so they can claim thrones, and they can divine bless the entire battlefield, which means I want every major army to have one. They also have 2 astral and 1 water, with the potential of another astral or another water, or earth or nature. Now you look at this, and you start salivating, and you go, wow, they could get up to 4 astral or 3 water. But it's really not going to happen, and let me tell you why. There is only a 10% chance of them getting any of these, right? Now, that means that there's only a 2.5% chance that they'll get the specific one that you want. Now, let's say you want 4 astral. Well, okay, first you have a 25% chance of getting 3 astral, and then you have a 2.5% chance of getting this astral. So really, in order to get both of them, you need to have a 25% chance of 2.5%, or essentially, oh boy, my math's getting hard here, but point like 6.5%. So it's the odds of getting 2 of the same path are just infinitesimally small, and to bank on is just silly. So when I see this 10%, I just ignore this completely and just assume it's never going to happen. If it does, fantastic, but it's definitely not something you want to strategize around. Still, I find that they're so versatile later in the game, and we have tons of spells. There's so many things they could cast, but I still keep going back to Word of Thorns, which is a spell that only a level 3 holy priest can cast, and it's a pretty effective spell. Another thing that makes Dominions 5 different from 4 is that in 4, all level 3 priests just had the same spell, Smite, which did damage. And now, to make it, I guess, a little more different, depending on what magic path your pretender has the highest in our case it's Ursula with nature, that Smite spell has other effects. Each different kind of magic has a different version of the spell, and ours is called Final Word, which if it doesn't kill the victim, it entangles them in vines. So that's kind of fun, and that's what these ladies are going to be doing most of all once they bless the battlefield. Finally, we have our absolute best mage, also takes 2 turns, also, like this lady here, can only be recruited in the capital. The Mashu. Now, they are astral powerhouses. What's unfortunate about that, though, is Astral is really not, in the early and mid-game, Astral's not a very useful battlefield magic, in my opinion. Now, I'm sure there'll be some expert players in the comments who'll be like, Marcus, you treacherous swine, Astral is one of the best paths, and here's why. And I'd love to hear it. But, in my opinion, the problem with a lot of the good Astral spells is they require gems. And I don't like, generally, having armies with a bunch of gems. So these guys, mostly, what you're going to see them in the mid-game starting, and they're going to be in order to forge things, mostly, or cast high-level Astral spells, since Ursula, praise her, doesn't have Astral in her repertoire. But they have a 25% chance of 4 Astral, which is really good. They have a 25% chance of Astral and Earth, which is incredibly good, because there's a whole side path of magic known as crystal magic, which is really useful. There's the crystal coin, which buffs your Astral. There's the crystal shield, which a commander can wield in the battle, which will buff every path they have. And then there's the communion stuff. In case you want to do a communion with somebody who doesn't have Astral magic, you can create a crystal heart, essentially, that they can wear, and it will allow them to be communion slaves or communion masters. So that's fun to get crystal guys. We're definitely going to want to recruit these guys until we get one who has Earth. And also with nature and Astral, they can do Moonvine bracelets, which are nature boost. No, hold on. Yeah, Moonvines are nature boosters. So that'll be useful for us. And yeah, that's that. So these guys essentially, they fill a niche, but we're not going to be seeing them that much on the battlefield. And they're expensive, so I don't want to overdo them. But I'm going to get a couple of them to forge necessary items. And then we have the workhorse of our leaders. And just like with they can only be recruited outside of our cities. They're our shamans. Why are they important? Because they come stocked with 2 nature and 1 earth. That is a good combination. 1, they can iron skin themselves before battle. And they are our best buffers, truth buffers. So I want one of these with every single army, especially in the mid-game when we research the spells Wooden Warriors, and later on Mass Protection. Because these guys, without any buffs at all, I think, but I'm going to give them a Thistle Mace if they're important, so they can cast a spell called Strength of Gaia, which is an incredibly good buffing spell, probably the best buffing spell in the game. For them specifically, it gives them Bark Skin, Strength, and I want to say Regeneration, even though they already have it. So it'll be even... No, they're not sacred. That's right, they're not sacred. So Ursula's Blessed does not fall upon them. So that would give them Regeneration to match the regeneration of my other mages. They're shitty at researching, and they are a Beastmaster, which means they're really good at leading animals. But in practice, this is unremarkable and worthless, and I'll tell you why. Because their leadership bonus is so bad. They have a -1 leadership bonus. The average NC has a +1 leadership bonus. So all this does, this +2 to Beastmaster, means that if this guy is leading an animal, that animal will have the same level of morale as if an NC was leading him. Because it's -2 from the NC, but then +2 for the animal. So not that spectacular. Again, what these guys are going to be used for is bark skinning as many of our troops as possible. And as you get further along the research tree, you will have better and better bark skinning spells, until finally you can bark skin the entire battlefield, as long as they have a special item called a cornucopia. That cornucopia, what it does is it gives them 2 nature gems automatically for every battle. That solves my problem of not wanting to carry around gems, and it allows them to cast spells that require gems, in this case Mass Protection, which is a fantastic spell. And there's other high-level nature spells they can cast too. So you're going to be seeing a lot of these guys, but again, we're going to have to be very strategic as to where we recruit them, because I'm going to be building a lot of forts, and they can't be recruited in a province with a fort. And if you have a province that borders like 2 forts, and they're each taking away half of that province's resources, then there's no resources left in that province to hire a shaman. So we're going to have to be careful and designate certain provinces for shaman recruitment and make sure there aren't 2 forts that border it. Okay, so now we get to the underwater version of Uruk. And now Uruk is an interesting underwater nation because they're good underwater. And as you see here, they have troops and commanders that are specifically for underwater, but they have no way to get underwater in the first place. They have no amphibious troops. Yes, you could use a 2-water Ishib, or one of these 2 who has 2 water, or this guy. But you have to cast certain spells, forge certain items. You have the poor amphibian penalty to deal with. So getting into the water is a real hassle. But once you do, then you have access to these guys. Specifically, I think when you build a fort underwater. Basic commander, this is essentially the Kululu or the underwater Enkidu version of the regular commander. 40 leadership. The Kululu King is the version of the Ensi with 80 leadership and up to 3 squads, but instead of the wealth of magical resources that the Ensis have, these guys only get 1 water. So good leaders, definitely not good mages, although Frozen Heart. And then finally, these guys, the Kululu Sage, are arguably our best researchers because they have the Adept Researcher bonus, and they're also our only unit that can get 3 water easily. 1/4 of them will have it. I think they're our only unit that comes with 2 water straight out of the get-go, which makes sense because they're underwater, but that's the only problem. We can't use them outside of the water, so you could, if you wanted to, maybe form a strategy where you start with a pretender who's awake and amphibious and immediately go underwater so that you can boost your research by these guys. By the time that we get underwater, we're probably not going to need them too much because we're probably already going to be researching at a pretty good clip, what with the owl quills and a bunch of research mages. But again, if you start near the water and are able to get down there early game, these guys would be great researchers. And they're really good for water spells, obviously. And then finally, the Kululu, or Kuliltu Queen, who takes after Ursula in that they don't like their chest to be encumbered by restricting garments. And they're actually pretty decent. They have 40 leadership. They have 1 water and 1 nature straight out of the get-go. And then they have a chance for air, water, astral, or nature. So they're actually pretty decent underwater commanders. In my opinion, I kind of like them better than the kings. Yes, they can't lead as many people, but because of their magic paths, they're more versatile. They can cast buffing spells and do other useful things. And let me double check this. No, they're both sacred. I think the commander is not, and I don't think the sage is. No. So the king and queen, though, are sacred. Alright, so now down to our national troops. Enkidu Archer, you are going to be seeing a fair amount of these guys. They're essentially just kind of rugged archers, but what makes them good is that because they have enhanced strength by being Enkidu, their range is really good, and their damage is pretty good. What's not that good is their accuracy. And so you'll see them shooting a lot and not hitting very much, and you'll also see them hitting our own people quite a lot, which frustrates me. So as I've been testing this nation, I've been hiring less and less archers. But there's also an upgraded version, the heavy archer. The only difference at all is higher protection. And they're obviously much more expensive. Not in terms of gold, I don't think. 16 gold, they might be even the same. Yeah, but in terms of resources. So you're not going to be seeing a lot of these guys on the battlefield, because if the enemy are fighting in melee with my archers, I've done something wrong. The battle is lost. It doesn't matter that they have additional armor. It does help protect them from enemy archers, but again, not that big a deal, and these guys take less resources. They're easier to mass, so you'll probably see me recruiting these guys a lot more. Then we have our basic spearmen. These guys can only be recruited... Actually, that's not true. I was going to say they can only be recruited outside of our capital, but that is not true. That's another unit entirely. You're going to be seeing a lot of these guys in the early game when I don't have that much in the way of resources. because they take only 14. But eventually, when I do have resources, they're going to be replaced by the soldier, which is essentially a heavy spearman. Same weapon, same shield, better armor. Then there is some specialist units. Very situational. These guys, the Royal Guard, they wield short swords. I wouldn't really recruit much of them in general versus the spearmen, who are good line holders, except that they are bodyguards. And bodyguards are really important because they have no morale negatives. So, for example, an NC who can lead 3 squads, well, he can lead 3 squads and a squad of bodyguards, so 4 total. And as long as they're bodyguarding him, they don't detract from his morale, which is great. And also for assassinations to protect, although you don't see a lot of assassinations with the AI, at least I haven't. Still, though, every one of our important commanders is going to get up to 5 of these guys. But that's really the only place you're going to be seeing them. I'm not going to recruit them like en masse, even though they can be recruited anywhere, just to be in my armies. There are better units for that, and I'll show them to you right here, the Enkidu Iron Warriors. So the story behind these guys is that they are technically the wild, primitive Enkidu from outside the walls of the city, but they have come into the city and been given special training and weapons. So you can kind of think of them as the Varangian Guard of the Enkidu. But what's cool about them is they have Berserker. So they will never run from battle. Well, if they're Berserker triggers, which it typically does if they get hit. And it also increases, I believe, their strength and attack skill at the cost of defense. So what these guys are good for, in my opinion, and I could be wrong, again, please tell me in the comments, is flanking. You're going to want your spearmen in the middle to hold the line, and you're going to want your archers behind them to pepper the enemy, and your mages behind them to cast spells, and then you're going to want these guys on the flanks to run around and slam their axes into the sides and backs of the enemies. That's how I'm going to use them. But then you get to our absolute workhorse. This is the Maiden of the Moon. This is our sacred infantry, and I'm going to be changing them a bit in this campaign. They are not going to be the Maidens of the Moon. I wish I could actually change the name of the unit. I guess there's probably some way you could by hacking into the game, but I'm not going to do that. They're instead going to be the Ursulan Guard. They're going to be the elite. They're going to be the people that basically are the higher-ups in the cult of Ursula, and they're, as a result, they are blessed by Ursula, which explains their sacredness. Of course, what that means is they don't technically have to be maidens. In fact, forced chastity is not something that Ursula is particularly fond of, clearly. I mean, she doesn't have anything against someone choosing to remain a virgin of their own free will, but the idea that you have to be a virgin in order to be an effective warrior is, that's not a very Ursula thing. So, no longer maidens, and no longer the moon. They are now devoted to Ursula, and we're going to hopefully have as many of these ladies as possible in every army that we have. The problem is they are capital only, and as sacred troops, we can only recruit them up to the amount of Dominion we have, which starts off at 5. However, if we're recruiting a mage, which we are going to be doing every turn, that reduces it to 4. So we're only going to get 4 of these ladies a turn, and they can only be recruited in the capital. Now, later in the game, when we build more temples, we can then have maybe 5 or 6 of them, depending on how many temples we get to build, which will help mass them, but you're never going to see them just all over the place. But let's talk about them a little bit, because I've seen some other LPs from some other Let's Players, most notably Tokshin, and what he does is he uses his sacred troops as on the attack. In one, for Tianqi, he used his cavalry, and in the other one, for Pangaea, he used his white centaurs. And they were just amazing. I mean, they tore through the enemy like a knife, a warm knife through butter. That is not what these ladies do. They are tanks, essentially. They are not going to be doing a ton of damage. I mean, they'll hold their own. They're good, but their purpose is not to just destroy the enemy. Their purpose is to be defensive with regeneration, 21 hit points, and their armor, and hopefully we'll be able to cast wooden warriors or 2 on them as well. Their job is to stand in front of everybody else and hold the line, and they do quite well at that purpose. And they'll end up, more often than not, killing more enemies than anyone else, simply because they're staying in battle for the longest. And also their encumbrance, which is relatively high, will be offset by their bless. But they are not going to be doing a whole lot of exceptional killing. Like, for example, any enemy with a high defense skill, I've seen them as high as like in the low 20s, but even the high teens, these ladies are going to struggle to hit. But in turn, they are going to stand a long time and get hit a lot themselves and not really suffer that much in the way of ill effects. So that's kind of their purpose. Their purpose is to hold the front of the line, and they're very good at that. Okay, then we go to the Mashusu chariot. So essentially, it is a Sirush with a chariot behind it. It's got some unique qualities. It is unsurroundable, which is a new thing, I think, for Dominions 5. At least I've never seen it before. And essentially, this means that they can be surrounded by enemies, and they will not get the reduced penalty of, I guess it's defense. I think the more people that surround you and attack you, the lower your defense goes. So it makes each subsequent attack have a higher chance of hitting. And I think with this, it makes it harder for them to do that. Yeah, the unsurroundable unit can be attacked as many times as its value, which is 2, so it's not amazing, but before getting a harassment penalty to their defense. Interesting. Again, I don't use these guys a lot. And here's the reason why. 19 hit points for a 200 gold unit. Now, some of you who are experienced will say, Marcus, you're kind of lying, because the 19 hit points only applies to the driver of the chariot, and if the driver is killed, if this reduces to 0, then the Sirush will just be there by itself, and it will have substantially more hit points. But, it's all a moot point. Basically, they have okay protection, okay defense. I feel for 200 gold, and it's not even just the 200 gold to recruit them that's the issue, it's the 160 gold a year to upkeep them. I just feel like I'd rather have 16 of these in place of 1 of the chariots. That's how I feel. Again, if there's a good use for them, or if I'm missing some amazing skill that they have, mention it in the comments, but for the gold cost, I just don't see them being worth it. Okay. And then we have this guy, the Enkidu warrior. You're hardly ever going to see this guy. He is an axe-wielding guy, which is kind of interesting in the sense that most of our city troops are spear people, but he can only be recruited outside of the forts, and so in order to mass a sufficient unit of these guys, you're going to have like a commander going around recruiting them from provinces who can only recruit like 3 at a time. Micromanagement, and also unnecessary in my opinion. Obviously axes have good damage, but we can always just get the iron warriors, which have 1 additional damage. And then our troops for Under the Sea are our regular Kalulus, which are essentially, I guess, naked, and they have a spear, so they're weak, with very low protection, very low defense. And then the upgraded version, the Soldier, who has a basic human protection, still a low defense, but again, high hit points and strength. But these guys are not going to be exceptional underwater troops. In fact, in test games, when I've gone underwater, I've recruited them, since that's all I've got, but most of my heavy lifting is being done by summons, like Krakens, Sea Serpents, Naiad Warriors are a particular favorite of mine. As far as magical sites, we get the Great Temple of the Moon, which you can just cross out the moon there, and it's the Great Temple of Ursula, which gives us 2 Astral Pearls, lets us recruit the Entu, Mashmashu, and the Ursulan Guard. We have the Swamps of Ur, which gives us the Chariot and 1 Nature. And we have the House of Water, which gives us 1 Water and 1 Earth. So we're going to be stockpiling Astral Gems at the beginning faster than anything else, but we do have a pretty decent diversity. You'll notice here, one particular gem type that is missing is Air. So we are going to need to find an air site ASAP in order to start forging Owl Quills, which are really our only buffing or research buffing item that we can get to with any ease, because the other one is a lightless lantern, which causes horror marking, and then there's the skull mentor, I think, which requires death magic, which we don't have access to at all. So that is all of our units and commanders. That is how I intend to use them. In terms of strategy, our overall strategy is going to be determined by essentially what gems we find early on. The absolute best gem type for us to find for how I want to play these guys is nature. I sincerely hope that we get a lot of nature gems. Even if we don't, as soon as she can, I'm going to have Ursula cast the nature gem spell, which is a Mother Oak, which gives us, I think, 10 nature gems a turn. Because nature plays such a huge role in what we're doing. First of all, the shamans need nature gems to cast their best spells. Second of all, you need nature gems to forge the boosters for the shamans, which are the thistle maces. Third, we are big, and I think that means we eat more. Or at least I've noticed that we tend to have supply issues relatively early, meaning your armies starve when they're marching across the world because there's not enough food to feed them. And there are items that you can forge that solve this problem, the Cauldron of Broth and the Wineskin, but they require nature gems. So those three things are hugely important. There's also some nature summons. Oh yeah, this won't show you this, but we have some national summons too that I'll quickly talk about. You know what I might do is I might put them up on the screen as like an image I'll get from the mod inspector. But our first summon that we get is, I believe, at level 3, and that of Conjuration, and that is buffaloes. We get to summon 5 buffaloes. They're iffy. If we have just nature gems coming out of our ears, they're probably pretty good. They cost 10 gems for 5 buffaloes, so it's not the best cost effectiveness, and they are incredibly fragile. They have low protection and low defense, so they die like nothing. But what's cool about them is they trample, and they're big. They're bigger than Enkidu even, so they're size 4, I think. Humans are size 2, and Enkidu are size 3. So they're great for flanking and trampling, but where I'd really want to use them, I think, is in the late game when we have the mass protection spell, because then they'll have enhanced defense, protection due to that spell, and they might be a bit sturdier, and then they might be more cost effective at that point. Plus, I think you get more of them if you have a higher level nature mage. I think it costs 2 nature to summon them, so if you have, like, for example, 3 nature, you can get 6 of them instead of 5, 4 nature, 7 of them, etc. But one of the main things we're going to be spending a ton of nature gems on are vine ogres, because vine ogres are big, they're tough, they have a ton of hit points, they are magical beings, and so they have incredible morale, they don't rout, and they don't eat. So we can get a shaman, we could forge a hat for him that makes him more effective at summoning vine ogres, and then we're just going to summon all the vine ogres that we can. But again, that is dependent on how many nature gems we have. If we don't have a lot of nature gems, we don't have a lot of vine ogres, and I'm going to have to change my strategy around that. So the next kind of gem after nature that we really want is air gems. And that is for a couple reasons. One, it will allow Ursula, praise her, to forge air boosters. That might take one of our air 1 guys. I don't think these guys actually get air, but girls, I guess, our air 1 girls, and make them, well, shit, who gets air? Okay, these guys, or the Gudus. And that will make them air 2, which allows them to forge a lot of really useful stuff, which also requires air gems. Like, for example, bows for our super nin assassins to fire, like the Thunder Bow and the Bow of War, are all nature. There is an astral bow that we can forge relatively easily, but it sucks. It does 999 damage, but I tested it, and it's magic resistance negating, and it, even though it hits something every time they fire it, it doesn't do any damage because the magic resistance always negates it. Like, I always think I'm clever, and I'm like, I'm going to get one of these, and I'm going to take down the enemies like big monster units, but it doesn't ever work. It just hits them and hits them and hits them, but they never actually kills them. So, not that useful to me. But air gems, back to air gems. So all those items, obviously, that we want to forge that require air. There's more than just the bows. There's also, for example, armor that's incredibly light, and other things that we're going to be needing and using. The other reason to have a lot of air gems is because our next 2 national summons are air summons. And so it's funny because they're national summons of Uruk, but nobody can cast them but Ursula. And the first one is what's called an Ugalu. And he's an interesting character. He is a flying birdman thing. And What's cool about the Ugalus is they come stock with 3 air. So it takes 3 air to summon them. So at the beginning, only Ursula can summon them. But once she summons one of them, then that one can summon more. But they're pretty expensive. I think they're like 30 air gems. So again, we're going to need a lot of air gems to get them. And I'll put up information about them on the screen, hopefully, in post-processing. But they're very versatile. First of all, they have good leadership. So they could lead armies instead of NCs. They are our only natural caster who can do some of the higher level air spells like Lightning Bolt and Thunder Strike. So that makes them probably the only decent evocation mage that our nation even has. So that they could be used for that purpose, although they're kind of expensive just to go around lightning bolting people. And finally, I've been toying with the idea, since they're sacred, of making them thugs, because they can mistform themselves, and then with a couple choice items, they should, and they're sacred, so that problem is they're not a priest. So they can't bless themselves. So either we give them the armor that makes them automatically blessed, or they have to accompany an army. But if they accompany an army with an N2, and they can be blessed, then they have regeneration, they have all the cool perks that all of our sacred units get, plus they fly, plus they have all that air magic. So I could see them being used as thugs. Probably too fragile to be a super combatant, though, because they only have like 30-some hit points. And then there is a unit that we can summon, not a commander, called an Anzu, which is higher than an Ugalu, so it takes longer to get to research-wise. But they're just this big monster bird, essentially, with a lion's head. And I honestly, in my test games, haven't utilized them too much. They're probably more of a late-game thing. What I like about them, like the one use I could see for them, is as a bodyguard for Ursula, because all of our natural bodyguards, which are these guys here, and another summon I'll talk about a bit later called a Kusariku, are grounded. They can't fly, and Ursula can, so they're going to slow her down. But giving her some of these birds, who can also fly, then she can fly around and do whatever she needs, but also have some tough bodyguards, and they have a bunch of hit points. Strangely, they don't have fear, like they don't cause fear, which you would think a giant bird with a lion's head would. But so they're a tough unit, but not spectacular. And those are our 2 air units, and that's why we're going to need air gems. Okay, then following air gems, we're probably going to want a lot of earth gems. First of all, the highest we can get in earth is 1, so we're going to need earth boots to get our earth guys up to level 2, which then they can use the spell Summon Earth Power to get to earth level 3, which would make them effective on the battlefield. That's also good for forging. It's also good for casting gnome lore. So that's a good use of our earth gems. But then there's other earth things we might want, like the aforementioned Armor of Knights, which improves the armor of our NCs. And there's also our national summon called a Kusariku, which I find is kind of expensive. But it costs earth gems, and it gives you essentially... it's not like a goat man, like a pan, but it's like a similar kind of thing. It's like a humanoid with goat legs, and they're sacred, and I think they have a similar amount of hit points to an Enkidu. I don't think they have a lot more, but they are good patrollers, and what makes them cool is that they have the bodyguard ability, like these guys. So if I have earth gems to spare, I'd love to have them as bodyguards for my big mages instead of these guys, simply because they're tougher and they're sacred. So that means they're cheap, and they have all the benefits of the bless. But again, if we don't have a lot of earth gems, I don't find them to be particularly cost effective. I think you get 2 or 3 at a time for something like 5 earth gems. It'll show, even though I can't remember it. And there are only earth summon. And the only national summon that we have left... Oh, another reason I want earth gems is just because Ursula has earth, and so she can cast some of the higher level earth spells like Earth Blood Deep Well, which is useful to us, and others. So finally, Astral Pearls. Our best national summon is a commander called an Apkalu, and they are actually pretty awesome. They are good priests, although not 3 holy. I think they're only 2. But they do have 3 in a number of different magic paths, which hopefully I'll show on the screen. And so they're amazingly versatile mages. They fly. They're good leaders. And that's really the problem at the end of the day with Uruk, is they're either really crappy mages that can't do anything amazing, or they're super versatile and can do so many things that you don't know what to do with them. So that's when we start getting Apkalus. I mean, we're probably going to be well on our way to victory anyway, but deciding how we're going to use them is going to be interesting, because they're so versatile. They have so many diverse magic paths. Definitely the first one we get, though, we're going to want to have sit at home. And the reason why is because they have an inspiring research bonus, which means that they add 1 to the research ability of every single research mage in the same province, which is super useful. And also we want them at home just to be able to forge things and summon things and use their diversity. So our first Apkalu is definitely not going to go on the battlefield. And I think I've pretty much, at this point, covered all of our summonable guys, my intentional strategy. So basically, depending on what type of gem type we find early on, I'm either going to go heavy into nature, go heavy into air, or go heavy into earth. Astral, we can supply enough gems nationally to be pretty good in that, I think. And that's really what we're doing. We don't have an easy source of water gems, although since we're not going to be using too many water gems, they tend to accumulate. So in the mid-game, if we want to go underwater, we'll have plenty of opportunity to do that. We're probably not going to see a whole lot of death gems. We're probably not going to see a whole lot of fire gems. And we're probably not going to see a whole lot of blood slaves, to be perfectly honest. I was toying with the idea of getting one of my shamans up to blood 2 to cast blood fecundity, which essentially is a blood orgy. You sacrifice blood slaves, and it improves the population growth of the province that it takes place in. We did a little bit of that in our first campaign. I think we had a guy named Bloody Bob who went around and did all that. But at least in Dominions 5, having a mage who does not have any ability in blood magic do blood hunting is just a recipe for frustration. Like, they suck at it. Like, 10 turns will go by and they won't find anything. So unless we find like an easily recruitable blood indie, there's just no real way that we're going to be able to cast blood fecundity, which is too bad, because, well, it's actually not really an Ursula spell. You think about it like, oh, that's kind of an Ursula spell, people having the orgy, but she's not that dark, Ursula. Like, I don't think sacrificing people and like having their blood spill all over the place is really, it's not really what she's about. She's wild, she's debaucherous, but she's not like evil, So anyway, so that is what I plan to do with these guys. This episode, I'm not looking at a clock. It could have gone really long, and it's just me yapping the whole time. But for those of you who really love the game or want to learn how to effectively use units or want to learn like how to leverage a nation's strength, I hope you were able to learn something from this and what I plan to do in the upcoming episodes that actually show gameplay. And of course, this gives an excellent opportunity for those of you who are experienced and good at the game to nitpick my strategy and let me know better ones in the comments, which, again, I don't mind. Hey man, if it makes me play better, I'm all for it. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, I am Marcus Aurelius. I would like to thank you so much for watching. Next episode, we're going to start the gameplay and go about on our merry adventure. I want you all to have a wonderful new year. If you're watching this in the future, just have a wonderful day, whatever day it is. Go out, do amazing things, and have a good one.